Did George Lucas really base Owen Lars on an important person in his own life? Why exactly does Owen hate the Jedi so much? Let's dive into Owen Lars' backstory to find out. It took years for Star Wars to get from George Lucas's brain to the big screen. And in that time, many of the director's original ideas underwent some pretty drastic changes. The non-fiction book, The Making of Star Wars, the definitive story behind the original film, details how the scripts evolved over 3 major drafts. Though his part ended up being relatively small, Uncle Owen was always intended to be part of the saga. In Lucas's rough draft, he and his wife, Beru, are anthropologists stationed on Yavin. This might be a nod to the career Lucas may have ended up with if he hadn't chosen to make movies instead. Lucas enrolled in Modesto Junior College, where he studied anthropology, among other subjects. He quickly transferred to film school at the University of Southern California, but his involvement with the Indiana Jones franchise makes it clear that he never really lost interest in the subject. In the second draft, Owen is a Jedi who, along with Beru, is tasked with caring for a set of twins, Biggs and Wendy, whose roles in the Star Wars universe ended up getting cut down to background characters. During this draft, however, Lucas introduced the idea of the Lars taking in a young orphaned Luke Skywalker. By the third draft, Owen Lars becomes the humble moisture farmer we know him as today. Owen Lars may have spent the majority of his life on Tatooine, but his story begins elsewhere in the galaxy. Owen was born to Cliegg Lars and his first wife, Ica, who does not appear in the films. According to the Star Wars Character Encyclopedia, updated and expanded, the family of 3 lived on the core world planet of Ator until she died of an unspecified cause. Cliegg and Owen return home to the family's ancestral moisture farm on Tatooine, where the father teaches his son the trade. Star Wars canon doesn't specify how old Owen is at this point, but these events transpired before he met his eventual wife, Beru, and early enough for him to have considered Shmi Skywalker a stepmother. Cliegg frees Shmi from Watto's slavery, after which point she marries him and returns to the homestead. Owen learns that he has a stepbrother, Anakin.
I had a feeling you might show up someday.
When a band of Tusken Raiders captured Shmi, Cliegg gathers 30 farmers to rescue her. Nearly all are killed in the effort. Sensing his mother's distress, Anakin and Padme arrive on Tatooine, at which point the young Jedi goes to look for Shmi. He finds her in time to share a final moment with her, then slaughters the Tusken Raiders and returns to the Lars moisture farm with her body. Owen, still a young man, has to mourn the loss of a second mother figure, then his own father, who dies of a broken heart shortly thereafter. Owen Lars marries Beru Whiteson, a third-generation moisture farmer herself, and the young couple assumes management of the Lars homestead after Cliegg's passing. They expect to start a family and carry on their family's traditions, but sadly, they discover they aren't able to have children of their own. In a short story from Star Wars, From a Certain Point of View, we learn that Beru and Owen consider using the services of a fertility droid. There are some to be found on Mos Eisley, but Beru decides against it, as Mos Eisley is too dangerous a place to order a drink, let alone conceive a baby.
Only watch your step. This place can be a little rough.
When Obi-Wan Kenobi approaches with the infant Luke Skywalker at the end of Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, both Beru and Owen have reservations. Beru suspects the miracle baby that suddenly appeared before her is too good to be true, and knows that there is an inherent risk to taking a child associated with the Jedi. Owen has a strong distaste for the Jedi stemming from everything that has happened concerning Shmi and Anakin. However, Beru falls in love with the baby the moment Obi-Wan puts the swaddled Luke in her arms. After his terrible start in life, Beru just wants to make Luke happy, although Owen fears he'll turn out to be too much like his father. From what we see of Owen Lars and Obi-Wan Kenobi, they're barely acquaintances, and Owen doesn't hold Old Ben in high regard. In fact, he actively keeps Obi-Wan away from Luke as much as possible, and not without reason. In a series of Star Wars comics from 2015, we learn that Owen believes his stepmother to be dead. He is angry with the Jedi for letting him fall to the dark side, and he directly blames Obi-Wan, who trained him. In Star Wars number 15, Owen accuses Obi-Wan of being the one who got Anakin killed. It's implied he suspects that Obi-Wan may even be the one who killed him. Though Owen accepts responsibility for the boy because Beru wants a family, he refuses to allow Obi-Wan to train him as a Jedi. Owen's distrust of Force users goes back to the depression his stepmother, Shmi, suffered after the Jedi Order took her only son away from her. The Lars' chief concerns aren't the Empire or the Jedi. They only want to eke out a happy life with little Luke while avoiding the corruption and danger posed by the Hutts as much as possible. Just because Owen tells Obi-Wan to stay away doesn't mean he listens. Surely Obi-Wan feels as much responsibility for Anakin's son as Owen and Beru did, and he also holds out hope that the Skywalker line might still bring the prophesied balance to the Force and peace to the galaxy. Obi-Wan watches as Luke grows up and shows great Force-wielding potential, and even finds a way to get him spare parts when he wrecks Owen's Skyhopper. But of much greater importance, he protects Luke, Owen, and Beru from threats they didn't even know existed. In one plotline from the 2015 run of comics, Owen admits that he knows Obi-Wan is the reason his farm is the only one never attacked by Hutts or Tusken Raiders. Owen doesn't permit Luke to train under Obi-Wan Kenobi, but he does give him an education that serves him his whole life. Luke's uncle teaches him everything he knows about hard work, discipline, self-defense, and mechanical engineering. In one of a series of Korean webtoons published prior to Star Wars The Force Awakens, Uncle Owen teaches a young Luke how to use a blaster rifle and permits his nephew to learn to pilot his equipment. Though Luke repeatedly insists he wants to get off Tatooine and do anything besides be a moisture farmer, Owen raises him to be a self-reliant individual and prepares him for a difficult future. Finally, Owen's rejection of the Jedi and Sith and his ability to carve out a sense of right and wrong on his own likely had a profound impact on Luke Skywalker. After all, Luke never finishes his training with Yoda, choosing to fight at his friend's side instead. A learned skepticism of the Jedi may explain his mindset when we meet up with him again in Star Wars The Last Jedi. After all, Luke wouldn't be the man he becomes without his uncle. Since Luke Skywalker is born into the Empire's reign, he wants to be what any boy would have wanted to be when they grew up, an Imperial pilot. It seems ridiculous to imagine in hindsight, but young Luke desperately wants to go to the Imperial Academy. The Empire is never very popular among regular folks across the galaxy. Some families would want their offspring to graduate from the highest-ranking academy branches and become officers, while other parents would see service as a threat. To be clear, Luke isn't necessarily pro-Empire. When C-3PO brings up the Rebel Alliance in relation to the hologram of Leia, Luke is enthusiastic and curious. But until those circumstances play out, Luke sees the Academy as his only ticket off of Tatooine and his chance to fly. As a younger man, he would often complain to Owen and Beru that most of his friends have already joined. But Owen keeps putting him off, convincing him to stay at the farm. Without Uncle Owen, Luke may well have ended up on the other side.
You can go to the academy next year. You must understand I need you here, Luke.
Except for a few scenes, the Star Wars movies are pretty tame. One moment that falls squarely outside of the realm of family-friendly is when Luke returns home to find that his Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru burned to death, with their property still on fire. He and Obi-Wan realized shortly before that the Empire could trace the droids back to the Lars family through the Jawas, from whom they'd been purchased. Thankfully, we don't witness this brutal scene, but we can assume that the Lars died because they wouldn't give up information. During a dinner conversation in Star Wars A New Hope, in which Luke reveals Princess Leia's hidden transmission, Owen and Beru make it obvious through their sideways glances at each other that they know more than they let on. However, Owen also lets it slip that Obi-Wan had been acquainted with his father, which is what piques Luke's attention and spurs him into looking for old Ben. That's when the Empire visits the Lars homestead. Still, the couple probably refused to talk about their nephew's whereabouts, the droids, or the reclusive Jedi, understanding their choice meant certain death. In our galaxy, practically everyone knows that Darth Vader is actually Luke's father. But Owen Lars probably died not knowing the truth about what became of his stepbrother, Anakin Skywalker. When Obi-Wan came to Tatooine with Anakin's newborn baby in tow, the Lars were led to believe that the Jedi Knight had perished. But Owen does repeatedly lament that Luke has too much of his father in him.
He knew my father? I told you to forget it.
This would seem to imply that he is aware of the fact that Anakin switches from Jedi to Sith, and maybe even that he knows that Anakin is the man under Vader's mask. However, very few people across the galaxy are privy to that knowledge. A more realistic scenario is that Owen simply wants Luke to stay away from Force users altogether to avoid a destiny like his father's. Owen and Beru's deaths became even more heartbreaking when one realizes that it is Darth Vader, Owen's very own stepbrother, who is hunting for the droids to put an end to the Rebel Alliance, which is what leads to their vicious murders. Owen Lars is a relatively minor character in the grand scheme of things, but it seems, especially considering he was in the original rough draft, that he's one of outsized importance to George Lucas. Lucas had a difficult relationship with his father, George Sr., who Lucas has described as a domineering, ultra-right-wing proprietor of a stationery store, as reported in The Atlantic. The senior Lucas expected his junior to follow precisely in his footsteps. When his son chose to study film instead, their relationship became strained. Lucas readily admits that all of his films are, in a way, about fathers and sons, and many are about young men trying to break free of unideal situations.
Is there anything I might do to help?
Oh, not unless you can alter time, speed up the harvest, or teleport me off this rock.
The tension between them is certainly reflected in Uncle Owen, and in Luke's eagerness to get off of Tatooine and avoid a future spent moisture farming. Star Wars is about a boy who escapes the mundane for a great adventure. But in the brief time Lucas spends on Luke and Uncle Owen, it's apparent that he's also working out his feelings about the home and the family he left behind. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite movies are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.